Frank Lucas did not look like a criminal mastermind. That was the first rule he rewrote. In an era when gangsters announced their power with fur coats, bodyguards, and loud reputations, Frank Lucas blended into the background. He dressed plainly. He spoke softly. He avoided attention the way others chased it. Most people who passed him on the street never looked twice. And that was exactly how he wanted it. Before we dive into this story, let us know where you are watching from. And if you love true crime cases, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next episode. In the late 1960s and early 1970s, Harlem was ruled by noise. Power was measured by how feared you were, how visible your violence was, and how loudly your name traveled through the streets. Gangsters wanted to be known. They believed reputation was protection. Frank Lucas believed reputation was a death sentence. He had watched the legends fall. Men who ruled entire neighborhoods one year were either dead or in prison the next. They were undone not by weakness but by ego. They wanted respect. They wanted recognition. They wanted the streets to know who they were. Lucas wanted none of that. Instead, he studied how power actually worked, who controlled supply, who decided prices, who could keep operations running without chaos. He noticed something others missed. The loudest men didn't last, but the quiet systems did. That insight became the foundation of everything he built. Frank Lucas came from poverty, but he did not come from ignorance. He understood hierarchy. He understood patience. Most importantly, he understood that crime didn't have to be emotional. It could be methodical. While others fought over corners, Lucas watched the pipelines. While crews battled for territory, he paid attention to logistics. He didn't want to own the streets. He wanted to own the flow beneath them. This was not how gangsters thought. The underworld was built on intimidation, loyalty, and tradition. Power was inherited, enforced, and defended through violence. The mafia controlled supply through legacy and fear. Street crews enforced territory with guns. Everyone answered to someone louder than themselves. Frank Lucas didn't challenge this structure directly. He ignored it. Ignoring the rules was more dangerous than breaking them. Lucas saw the drug trade not as a battlefield, but as a business buried under superstition. Too many middlemen, too much waste, too many egos demanding a cut simply because they had always taken one. He believed the system could be simplified. And once simplified, it could be controlled. He did not announce his intentions. There were no speeches, no warnings, no declarations of independence. He moved quietly, step by step, eliminating inefficiency without attracting attention. Where others relied on intimidation, Lucas relied on reliability. Same product, same quality, same delivery. Over and over again. Dealers noticed before law enforcement did. Working with Lucas meant fewer surprises, fewer shortages, fewer sudden price changes. Violence became unnecessary because disputes were resolved by consistency, not threats. That alone changed the atmosphere of entire neighborhoods. For the first time, criminal activity felt organized instead of chaotic. Arrests didn't destabilize markets. Turf wars slowed. Corners operated without constant bloodshed. It didn't look like a criminal empire. It looked like order. Law enforcement didn't know what to make of it. They were trained to chase chaos. They followed gunfire, not silence, and Frank Lucas was silent. That silence allowed him to grow. Lucas understood another truth most gangsters ignored. Fear creates enemies, but stability creates dependence. People didn't fear Lucas. They depended on him, and dependence is harder to break than intimidation. He didn't need loyalty ceremonies. He didn't need public displays of dominance. He didn't even need people to like him. He just needed them to keep choosing his system over everyone else. They did. Slowly, without announcements, Frank Lucas rewrote the rules of organized crime. Power no longer belonged to the most violent man in the room. It belonged to the one who could keep everything running without disruption. The underworld didn't bow to Lucas because he demanded it. It bowed because his way worked better. And by the time anyone realized the rules had changed, Frank Lucas had already built something no one knew how to challenge. Fear had always been the foundation of criminal power. Frank Lucas removed it from the equation. For generations, gangsters ruled by intimidation. Violence was currency. The threat of it kept people obedient, and its public display kept rivals cautious. A reputation for brutality was protection. That belief shaped every criminal empire before Lucas. He saw it differently. Lucas believed fear was unstable. It demanded constant reinforcement. Miss one payment, hesitate once, show mercy at the wrong moment, and fear collapsed. Worse, fear attracted attention. Violence created witnesses, witnesses created informants, and informants created cases. Lucas wanted durability, not dominance. So he built power that didn't rely on threats. He replaced fear with predictability. Everyone working within his operation knew the rules and knew they would not change without reason. Payments arrived on time. Supply stayed consistent. Decisions were made quietly and enforced evenly. This created something rare in the underworld: trust. Not emotional loyalty, but operational trust. People trusted the system would function. That trust made violence unnecessary. Disputes were settled by access, not aggression. If someone violated the rules, they weren't publicly punished. They were simply removed. Silence did the rest. Lucas avoided emotional reactions. No displays of anger. No impulsive decisions. Ego had no role. Every action was calculated around one goal: keeping the system invisible and stable. This was a radical departure from gangster tradition. Most criminals believed power had to be visible. Lucas believed visibility was weakness. He kept his personal life understated. He avoided drawing attention to wealth. He understood that image created narratives, and narratives invited scrutiny. Power to him was not being feared. Power was being necessary. Dealers stayed because the operation worked. They didn't worry about sudden shortages or reckless retaliation. Corners tied to Lucas were calmer. Violence dropped not out of morality but efficiency. Blood disrupted business. This calm confused law enforcement. There was no obvious boss, no chain of command marked by intimidation. Arrests didn't cause chaos. Removing individuals didn't destabilize operations. That was intentional. Lucas designed his organization to survive individual losses. Roles were interchangeable. Communication was limited. No one knew more than they needed to. The fewer people who understood the full system, the safer it became. Fear couldn't do that. Structure could. As word spread, others wanted in, but growth was controlled. Lucas limited expansion carefully. New participants were tested for discipline, not loyalty. Anyone who wanted attention was excluded. He wasn't building an army. He was building a machine. The streets adjusted. The old rules, be loud, be feared, be violent, began to feel outdated. Lucas proved that restraint could outperform aggression, that silence could dominate noise. This wasn't kindness. It was evolution. And as his influence expanded, one thing became clear: the underworld was no longer ruled by the men who shouted the loudest. It was ruled by the man who said the least. For decades, the mafia controlled the flow. If you wanted product, you went through them. They didn't need to dominate every street corner. Their power lived higher up the chain. They controlled imports, transportation, and wholesale distribution. Street crews fought over territory, but the real authority sat quietly above them, collecting profits through fear and tradition. Frank Lucas recognized the weakness in that structure. Too many hands, too many payments, too much reliance on inherited power. The mafia believed their position was permanent. Lucas believed permanence was an illusion. Instead of challenging them directly, he went around them. He removed himself from their supply chain completely. By going straight to the source, Lucas eliminated the layers that existed only to extract money and enforce tradition. This wasn't defiance. It was efficiency. By controlling supply directly, Lucas gained something far more valuable than territory. He gained leverage. He controlled purity. He controlled price. He controlled timing. Every dealer beneath him became dependent on his reliability. That dependency shifted power quietly. At first, the mafia didn't notice. There were no threats, no public disrespect. Dealers simply stopped calling. Orders slowed. Payments disappeared. Loyalty moved without confrontation. When they realized what was happening, there was no clear target. Lucas had no public headquarters, no visible hierarchy, no street presence that could be challenged without drawing attention. He had rewritten another rule. Power didn't need to defend itself if it wasn't announced. Traditional gangsters relied on fear to enforce control. Lucas relied on math, lower prices, higher quality, predictable delivery. The streets followed logic, not loyalty. The mafia still existed, but they were suddenly optional. That was unprecedented. Criminal networks began adapting. Some tried to copy Lucas's model. Others doubled down on intimidation. Neither approach restored their dominance. Once dealers experienced stability, chaos felt unacceptable. The underworld had changed. Frank Lucas had turned organized crime into an operation governed by supply chains instead of reputation. The streets no longer answered to legacy or fear. They answered to whoever controlled access. And access belonged to Lucas. This shift didn't come with celebration. There was no victory lap. Lucas remained invisible. His greatest success was being underestimated. By the time the old guard understood what had happened, their rules no longer applied. The mafia hadn't been defeated. They had been bypassed. And in the underworld, irrelevance is worse than loss. Frank Lucas built his empire by avoiding attention. Eventually, that success became impossible to ignore. Law enforcement was trained to follow noise. Shootings created informants. Turf wars revealed leadership. Violence exposed hierarchies. But the neighborhoods connected to Lucas didn't behave that way. Arrests didn't cause chaos. Supply didn't collapse. Prices didn't spike. Violence stayed low. That consistency felt wrong. Investigators began noticing patterns that didn't match street-level crime. The same product appeared across multiple neighborhoods. Packaging looked identical. Purity levels barely fluctuated. Distribution routes repeated with mechanical precision. This wasn't coincidence. It was coordination. Instead of hunting individuals, law enforcement shifted strategy. They studied logistics. They mapped repetition. They tracked financial behavior that didn't align with small-time dealers. What they found wasn't a traditional criminal gang, it was an operation. Lucas sensed the shift long before warrants appeared. He didn't panic. He adjusted. Routes rotated. Couriers were replaced. Communication narrowed to essentials. The system recalibrated quietly, just as it always had. But no system remains perfect forever. As profits grew, discipline weakened. Some participants became careless. Others grew ambitious. Comfort replaced caution. The rules that once felt necessary began to feel excessive. Silence, once protective, began to crack. Corruption added another layer of risk. Bribes bought warnings and delays, but they also created dependency. The more the system relied on compromised outsiders, the more exposed it became. Once investigators suspected corruption, they slowed down. They stopped reacting and started waiting. Waiting favored them. They gathered fragments, small arrests, minor mistakes, financial irregularities, none of it was enough alone. Together it formed a map. Efficiency became the giveaway. The traits that had rewritten gangster rules, discipline, consistency, silence, now marked the operation as something extraordinary, and extraordinary things attract attention. On the streets the mood shifted, movement slowed, trust thinned. Silence no longer felt safe, it felt watched. Frank Lucas had built power by staying invisible. Now invisibility was no longer possible. The rules had changed again, this time beyond his control. Frank Lucas did not fall in a blaze of violence. His empire ended the way it was built, quietly. There were no dramatic raids meant for television cameras, no shootouts in the street. The takedown arrived through paperwork, coordination, and patience. Warrants were executed methodically. Surveillance files were unsealed. Arrests were timed to minimize disruption. The streets didn't explode when Lucas was taken in. They paused. That pause revealed the truth about his power. The organization had been designed to operate without constant oversight, but it had still revolved around one mind. Lucas wasn't just a leader. He was the strategist, the final authority, the person who adjusted the system when pressure appeared. Without him, hesitation spread. Couriers waited for instructions. Distributors slowed movement. Money stopped flowing with its usual precision. Silence, once protective, became uncertainty. In the courtroom, Lucas faced a world where his rules didn't apply. Discipline meant nothing there. Silence offered no shield. Evidence replaced reputation. He assessed the situation the same way he always had, without emotion. He calculated. Cooperation became leverage. Lucas chose to talk, not out of remorse but strategy. His testimony exposed corruption that had quietly supported the operation. Officers, intermediaries, and institutional weaknesses were pulled into the open. The damage went beyond his own case. The underworld lost its illusion of insulation. Protection that once seemed permanent was revealed as fragile. Loyalty became conditional. Silence lost its power. Without centralized control, the market fractured. Supply chains broke apart, prices fluctuated, violence returned, not because people wanted chaos, but because chaos fills the space left by order. The streets didn't miss Frank Lucas. They missed stability. His collapse proved something fundamental. Fear had never held the empire together, structure had, and structure, once broken, could not be easily replaced. Frank Lucas had rewritten gangster rules by proving discipline could outperform terror. His downfall proved the final rule. No system survives without its architect. Frank Lucas did not vanish from history when his empire collapsed. He receded. That distinction matters. Vanishing suggests erasure. Receding suggests influence that remains, shaping the space long after the source is gone. Lucas left behind no territory, no organization, no loyal army waiting for his return. What he left was a method. After his fall, Harlem did not return to its old equilibrium. The streets grew louder again. Supply chains fractured. Violence crept back in uneven waves. Competing crews fought to fill the vacuum left by the structure. The order Lucas had imposed, however quietly, had kept chaos at bay. And once it disappeared, its absence was felt. Criminal organizations across the country took notice. Some tried to imitate pieces of Lucas's system: direct sourcing, tighter logistics, reduced visibility. Most failed. They copied the mechanics but ignored the restraint. They wanted efficiency without patience, control without silence. Lucas had proven something difficult to replicate. Discipline was more powerful than fear, but only when enforced without ego. Law enforcement changed as well. The era of chasing loud criminals faded. Investigators began focusing on patterns, money movement, and logistical consistency. Silence was no longer assumed to mean safety. quiet operations became priority targets. In that sense, Lucas reshaped both sides of the war. His legacy remains complicated. To some, he represented a businessman applying logic to an illegal economy. To others, he symbolized the damage that efficiency can inflict when applied without morality. Addiction spread. Communities suffered. The order came at a cost. Both views coexist because both are true. Frank Lucas was not powerful because he was violent. He was powerful because he was patient. He understood that power works best when it feels normal, when people stop noticing it, when it becomes part of the background rhythm of daily life. The underworld bowed to Frank Lucas not because he demanded submission, but because his system outperformed everything that came before it. And when those rules changed, they never fully changed back. Frank Lucas rewrote gangster rules quietly. That silence may be his most enduring legacy.